This episode of Love Larn is sponsored by Scott Bonnar Fabrication and Parts. I've got set out here a number of painted parts from the Twin. Wanted to just take you through, I guess, my approach to painting and masking and all that sort of stuff, because there are a few little tricks to be aware of. In particular, where your clutch corks sit, and where the cone, the clutch cone, will sit in relation to the cork. So if we look inside here, I've just used my trusty blue tape, painter's tape, to mask off the inside section of this clutch half where where I'll eventually be gluing the corks in. And if you recall, the clutch cone will engage with the corks like so. So once the cork's in there, there'll be a little bit less material, so it'll sit about there when it's engaged. So, looking at the clutch cone itself, I've masked off this section down here, just leaving a straight line across the top where it will roughly sit. And I haven't painted the inside at all either. Probably could have chucked some primer on there. Might still do so, but it doesn't really need it. It just gets, it's all enclosed, it gets dirty in there and stuff anyway. Also the top, I do have some primer on the top there, but I didn't paint it up there. Again, I maybe could have, but the thrust pad and washer sit up against that, and the clutch cone itself will be spinning, whereas the thrust pad is fixed, so I figured it might be best just to leave that. What I probably should have done was polish that metal a little bit, just to give it a little bit of a nicer finish, but I think we'll see how we go. And one other thing to mention is that the shape of this conical section is quite difficult to mask. You can't just wrap a piece of tape around it. So what I ended up doing was taking a bunch of little short lengths and sort of overlapping them. It's not the best result, as you can see, it does wobble a little bit, but hopefully that will be buried in the clutch half anyway, and it won't be terribly visible. My only question now is, have I come down far enough with the lip of that paint, but we'll see. The insides of the two clutch halves I've left unpainted as well. Probably could have painted them, but figured they didn't need to be, so I'd leave them how they are. The one section that you do need to leave unpainted is the inside of this clutch half, where the corks are glued to that rim. So that's been left as is. A few other odds and ends. The upper bearing housing, I've left that primed on the inside but unpainted, mainly so I could get it to sit nicely up against the frame of the machine, but also just because I don't know, I just don't really like putting painted surfaces up against painted surfaces. So the side of the frame will be painted. I didn't think this would be wise to paint it because it might pull the paint off when it comes apart in the future at some point. Lower bearing housings for the reel. Again, the bearing is going to sit in here, and this section sits up against the side of the machine, so I left them bare and painted everything else. Also tried to avoid getting paint in the screw holes and bolt holes where the fixings go. And lastly, I've got my clutch shaft, which sits on our clutch cone like so, and then bearing housing will go up like that. That section goes through the side of the machine, bearing goes on there. So sort of hazarded a guess as to, if you can see in there, how the keyways would line up in terms of how far in or not I needed to go. I can see right now that there's not a lot of room for that shaft to fit any further in there if it needs to go. So I'm really glad I didn't paint that any further, because the tolerances are, you know, they're not perfect. There's a little bit of wiggle room, but you know, definitely didn't want to go any further. I can always put some extra paint on there if I need to, and don't forget the thrust pad will be there anyway. On this section we'll have the bearing sitting there, and the sprocket anyway, so that section definitely doesn't need to be painted. Maybe worth noting as well that this is just the straight Hammerite over an etch primer. I put 2 coats of the Hammerite dark green on, and I know someone in the Scott Bonnar Restorations Facebook group did put a clear coat over their Hammerite, one of the Dulux spray can top coats, the clear, and it started to bubble and peel quite severely, so the advice that I've received from everyone is to leave it as it is and not push it. And the approach that I'm going to take basically is to just leave this paintwork to harden for as long as I can before I need to put it all together, so that A, it's durable, and that B, that any painted surfaces that do come together hopefully won't adhere to one another once they're screwed together. So I'm all set to do some painting at long last today, at least some tests anyway. What I'm using is the Hammerite dark green hammered paint. You can see a bit of colour on it there on the cover. Basically the instructions say to do a little test on a small section before you commit and do the whole thing. I wasn't going to, but I am going to do just that today because I'm using a Dulux and a Dymark branded primer, or etch primer and primer, on some of my parts. Not mixed, but just different parts ended up with different primers on them, different brands. And I want to make sure that they're going to be compatible with this paint, because I don't want to end up in a situation where I slop it all on and then have to go back and take it all off again because it's bubbled or peeled or hasn't cured properly. So this stuff's a terps based paint, a solvent based. It's not a spray paint. You could spray it, I guess, but I'm going to brush it on. And so because I'm brushing it on, and because I hate cleaning brushes, I've got one of my kids' little tiny art brushes here, and I'm just going to do some quick tests on the backs of some areas that are nice and flat and I can sand off again if I do come up against any problems. So the manufacturer recommends applying this to bare metal, but from what I understand it can also be applied over a primer. And in my experience there's probably no harm in doing so. The manufacturer also recommends giving it a gentle stir, which is what I'm doing now. I can just see the swirls of metallic colour going through it, so I'm just trying to get that sort of consistent. And so what I've got here, that's got the Dulux primer, I believe. That's the Dymark etch primer. And I believe this chain case has probably got the Dulux etch primer. So from what I've read from other people online is that it will go the distance, and there'll be a little bit left over as well, which would be great for touch-ups and stuff. This was about $40 for this tin. I got it from Inspirations in Balcata here in WA for, I think it was $45 originally, and because I'm a member of the paint club, I got a little discount of 5%. Probably just the trade discount. Now, so I've heard the stuff flows out pretty well as well, which is, if you can see that, hopefully, it's generally what I'm finding as well. Basically try not to leave brush marks, and I'm trying to do that by putting enough paint on there so that it will sort of level out of its own accord. I'm also trying to put on a fairly thin coat. I really don't actually need to be painting the back side of this item, but you know, it's a constant battle against corrosion in my life, so why not? So I'll have to clean this brush up. It just cleans up with mineral turps. The manufacturer says to use their thinners, but I'm not sure I see the need. I'll let that dry a little bit. From what I understand, recoat time's about, I believe it's about 10 minutes. I read another comment this morning, someone saying that in their experience it was better to recoat sooner rather than later, you know, as in don't leave it for, you know, a day between coats or anything. Do the inside of this chain case, or a section of it anyway. I'm not sure what I'm going to do really. It's sort of hard, like the stuff's fairly thick. And I don't want to sort of do, you know, just a little section and then end up with a, you know, a ridge or something ugly. So you know, there's a big surface here to have to tidy up after the fact, but I think it will be okay. I'm hoping it's going to be okay. A bit crap in there. Probably not taking the best approach to this. I should probably be doing the inside edge first here before tackling the rest of it. Probably worth noting, a lot of people would probably recommend using a foam brush for this so you don't get brush marks. I just don't like sort of chucking, you know, I don't like the disposability of that thought. So I'd rather, this isn't a very expensive brush, I've used it for various things in the past, and you know, just washes out with a bit of terps. I'll wrap it up with some alfoil and a bit of cling film over that so it doesn't dry out while I'm waiting for this to set up. And then just clean it when I'm definitely finished with it. This is a good little size brush. It's 2 inches basically, the 50mm, so it's you know, nice, and it's a bit thick, but it's otherwise a good size for sort of getting into some of these slightly tricky areas. Got a few little sort of drips and sags, which means I've probably put it on a little bit on the thick side. So we'll ease up a little bit maybe. My brush is, I should have probably put some terps on, just to sort of preload it with the solvent rather than the paint, just to facilitate cleanup, to simplify cleanup, but also to you know, just get a tidier result really. But no matter. Pretty happy with the color of this. The Dulux spray cans. I really don't like the colors that they sell, to be quite honest, and that's you know, certainly not to say that I don't like the efforts of the people who use those colors, but the tone of green that they have just doesn't really catch my eye, and it's really bloody hard to find over here for some reason. I'm sure it's a good product, but just not the right color that I was looking for. Whereas I really quite like this dark green. It's pretty moody. Yeah, probably not terribly original by any means, but it didn't really say I was after originality necessarily in terms of, you know, restoring to the standard of the original machine. So I'm finding this stuff's leveled out pretty well in terms of brush marks. And that's pretty much I think our first coat done now. I'm going to resist every temptation to go back and finesse it and just let it sit now until it's dry. So not perfect. I was hoping for a slightly better result for a first coat, but that'll do. We're definitely getting some hammering going on, which is cool, especially on the top section. I don't know how well you can see that. Hopefully it's slightly visible. Down the bottom where I've been brushing still has a little bit of time to go to set up, but we'll leave that aside and pop the lid back on our can and see how we travel over the next few minutes, next hour. And I think I'll do my second coat. Actually, I'll start painting and do a second coat tomorrow on this stuff. So that's the first bit that we started. I don't know if you can see that. I've got a few brush marks. I did go back and run the brush over that to get rid of a couple of the sags afterwards. So luckily that goes at the back of the machine, and we'll live and learn. And you know, as far as I can tell so far, no issues with the compatibility, but that will come in the next couple of hours or day, I suppose. So worth noting as well, it's about I think 16 degrees out here today. The can says that's within the ideal temperature range. I believe it's between 8 and 25 degrees, I think. Especially for chirps over here, I find you know, if you're doing this stuff on a warm day, it just goes tacky before you can almost blink at it, which tends to drive me nuts. I'm out here in the plain, in the fresh air, so hopefully we're not going to get too many insects and too much dust collecting in here. Fortunately, it's a fairly still day, and it's the middle of the day, so there's not too much stuff flying around at the moment, which is great. But we'll keep an eye on it. One other thing that's worth mentioning is that it's this paint doesn't smell too bad, you know, despite being solvent based. So I could probably be doing it inside in the garage. It'd be nice to be able to do it overnight, but I find working during the middle of the day when it's not too hot is probably ideal.